I met DeAndre at a community food drive in 2014. And honestly, I almost didn't go. My best friend had been nagging me for weeks about volunteering, going on and on about how I needed to give back to the community and meet new people. I was 26 and perfectly happy with my social circle. Thank you very much. But she wouldn't let it go. So there I was on a Saturday morning, sorting canned goods and pretending to care about helping the less fortunate. When this guy walks over to my station, he was tall, maybe 6'2", with these really steady brown eyes and hands that looked like they actually knew how to fix things. Not like the guys I usually dated who couldn't change a light bulb without calling their dads. "You look like you could use some help," he said, and his voice had this calm quality that made me pay attention. Most guys led with some cheesy pickup line or tried way too hard to be funny. But DeAndre just started organizing the soup cans like it was the most natural thing in the world. We worked together for the rest of the morning, and I found myself actually enjoying the conversation. He listened when I talked, really listened, not just waited for his turn to speak. When I mentioned that I worked in marketing, he asked thoughtful questions instead of making jokes about how I probably convinced people to buy things they didn't need. When the volunteer coordinator thanked everyone at the end, DeAndre turned to me and said, "I'd love to take you to dinner sometime, if you're interested." A week later, we were sitting across from each other at this little Italian place he'd picked out. Not some chain restaurant or sports bar, but an actual restaurant with cloth napkins and waiters who knew about wine. I did some research, he admitted when I complimented his choice. I wanted somewhere we could actually talk. That should have been my first clue about the kind of person he was. Thorough, thoughtful, the type who planned ahead and considered all the angles. Dinner lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of the kind of conversation I'd been craving without even realizing it. He told me about his job in project management, his close relationship with his family, his plans to buy a house in the next few years. I found myself sharing things I usually kept private, my complicated relationship with my parents, my dreams of maybe starting my own marketing firm someday, even some embarrassing stories from college that I'd never told anyone. The next 3 years flew by in a blur of weekend trips, family dinners, and the kind of steady happiness I'd never experienced before. DeAndre wasn't the most exciting guy I'd ever dated, but he was reliable in a way that felt refreshing after years of dealing with guys who disappeared for days at a time or showed up late to everything. He remembered things I told him, followed through on plans, and treated me like I mattered. When I got food poisoning and spent 2 days basically dying on my couch, he showed up with soup and stayed to take care of me, even though I looked like absolute hell. We moved in together after 18 months, and it felt natural, easy. He had this way of making space for me in his life without making it feel like some huge sacrifice. My books found homes on his shelves. My coffee maker replaced his ancient one. And suddenly we had routines that felt like they'd existed forever. Sunday morning pancakes. Thursday night grocery runs. Friday evening movies on the couch. It was comfortable, stable, the kind of relationship my friends envied. So when he took me back to that same Italian restaurant in 2017 and got down on one knee next to our table, of course I said yes. The ring was perfect, not too flashy, not too simple. Exactly what I would have picked for myself if I'd been brave enough to hint that, obviously, "I wanted to ask you here," he said, "because this is where I knew I was going to marry you." Classic DeAndre, sentimental and practical at the same time. Our wedding the following summer was everything I'd dreamed of. Small enough to feel intimate, big enough to celebrate with everyone who mattered. DeAndre cried during his vows, which surprised me because he wasn't usually the emotional type. And I felt like the luckiest woman alive walking back down that aisle with my new husband. Finally, I had the life I'd always wanted, the stable guy, the beautiful wedding, the promise of a future that made sense. The first year of marriage was good, really good. We settled into married life like we'd been practicing for it, which I guess we had been. DeAndre was the same steady, thoughtful person he'd always been, maybe even more so now that we were officially committed. He brought me coffee in bed on Saturday mornings. Remembered to pick up my dry cleaning. Never forgot important dates. We talked about buying a house. Maybe starting a family in a few years. All the normal things married couples discuss. But somewhere in the second year, things started to feel different. Not bad. Exactly. Just predictable. DeAndre would come home from work. We'd eat dinner while watching the news. He'd do some work on his laptop while I scrolled through social media. And we'd be in bed by 10:30. Rinse and repeat. Monday through Friday. Weekends weren't much better errands. Meal preps. Maybe dinner with friends who spent the whole time talking about their kids or their mortgages. I started feeling restless in a way I couldn't quite explain. Here I was, living the life I'd always said I wanted, married to a man who loved me and treated me well. And I felt bored, suffocated. Even when I tried to bring it up with DeAndre, he'd listen patiently and then suggest we plan a weekend getaway or try a new restaurant. Missing the point entirely. It wasn't about needing more activities, it was about needing more excitement. More spontaneity, more of the unexpected. By late 2020, the pandemic had made everything worse. We were stuck at home together constantly, and DeAndre's steady, calm presence started feeling less like comfort and more like being trapped in a beige room. He handled the lockdown the same way he handled everything else, methodically, responsibly, with spreadsheets and schedules and endless research about safety protocols. Meanwhile, I felt like I was slowly going insane from the routine, the predictability, the complete lack of anything resembling adventure. That's when Sarah called about the party at Mike's house. Just a small thing, she said. Maybe 15 people. Everyone's been tested. It sounded like exactly what I needed: real conversation, real laughter, a break from the monotony of pandemic life with my overly cautious husband. When I mentioned it to DeAndre, he barely looked up from his laptop. Sounds crowded, he said. Maybe not the best idea right now. Right now meaning forever. Apparently, DeAndre had turned into the safety police, analyzing every potential risk and deciding we should just stay home indefinitely. But I was 28 years old, not 88, and I deserved to have some fun once in a while. It wasn't like I was asking to go clubbing every weekend. I just wanted one night where I could talk to people who didn't discuss hand sanitizer effectiveness over dinner. I think I'm going to go, I told him. I need to get out of this house. He shrugged without looking up. Okay. Have fun? That was it. No offer to come with me. No suggestion of a compromise. Just casual dismissal. If DeAndre wanted to stay home and reorganize his sock drawer or whatever, fine. But I wasn't going to waste away just because my husband had turned into someone's boring dad. The party was exactly what I'd hoped for: music, laughter, people actually talking about interesting things instead of grocery lists and Netflix shows. I felt like myself again for the first time in months, social and funny and alive. I was having such a good time that I almost didn't notice Ryan walk in around 10 o'clock. Ryan, my ex from before DeAndre, the one who'd been all passion and intensity and zero follow-through. We dated for about 6 months before it fizzled out the way those relationships always do: too much drama, not enough substance. But seeing him there, with that same crooked smile and confident swagger, brought back memories of a time when my life had felt less predictable. Rebecca, he said, appearing next to me at the kitchen counter where I was refilling my drink. I was hoping you'd be here. We fell into conversation easily, the way you do with people who know your history. He was still charming, still had that way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. And maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the relief of talking to someone who remembered the version of me that existed before marriage and mortgages. But I found myself laughing at his stories and standing a little closer than I should have. The details of what happened next are honestly fuzzy. I know there was more drinking, more talking, more of Ryan's hand on my arm when he made a point. I know we ended up on the back porch where it was quieter, and then somehow we were in his car because he was giving me a ride home. Except we went to his place instead. I know we ended up in his bedroom. And I know that in my drunk, confused state, I honestly thought I was with DeAndre. I swear that's the truth. In the moment, with the room spinning and my judgment completely shot, I genuinely believed I was with my husband. It wasn't until I woke up the next morning in Ryan's bed, with sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the smell of someone else's sheets, that reality crashed over me like ice water. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I kept thinking about what I was going to tell DeAndre, how I was going to explain what had happened without making it sound worse than it was. Because it wasn't like I'd planned this. It wasn't like I'd set out to cheat on my husband. It was a mistake. A terrible, alcohol-fueled mistake that never would have happened if I'd been thinking clearly. DeAndre was in the kitchen when I walked in, reading the newspaper with his coffee like it was any other Saturday morning. He looked up and smiled, and the guilt hit me like a physical blow. This man who loved me, who trusted me, who'd spent the night worried about me getting home safely. And here I was walking in still wearing yesterday's clothes with another man's scent on my skin. How was the party? He asked, and I could hear genuine interest in his voice. Fine. I managed. Good. It was good. For 2 days, I carried the weight of what had happened like a stone in my chest. DeAndre went about his normal routine, completely unaware that anything had changed. While I tried to figure out how to handle the situation, part of me wanted to just let it go, to treat it like the meaningless mistake it was, and move on. But the guilt was eating me alive, and I knew I couldn't live with the secret. On Monday evening, I finally worked up the courage to tell him. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, DeAndre reading some work document while I pretended to watch television. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. DeAndre? I said, and something in my voice made him look up immediately. I need to tell you something. The words came out in a rush, the party. The drinking, waking up in Ryan's bed. The confusion and guilt and how sorry I was that it had happened. I tried to explain about the alcohol, about how I genuinely thought I was with him in the moment, about how it didn't mean anything and would never happen again. DeAndre sat completely still while I talked, his face going through a series of expressions: confusion, hurt, disbelief, and finally something that looked like disgust. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, just staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "You slept with your ex," he said finally, his voice flat and cold. "There's no accident in that." "But I thought—" "You thought what?" "That you were with me." He stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. "You thought you were in our bed? In our house? With your husband? But somehow you were actually in Ryan's apartment?" I started crying then. Ugly sobs that made it hard to speak. I was drunk. DeAndre, really drunk. I wasn't thinking clearly. "No." He held up a hand to stop me. "Don't do that. Don't blame this on alcohol. You made choices. You chose to go to that party. You chose to drink too much. You chose to leave with him. You chose to sleep with him. It wasn't like that." I begged. "Please. You have to understand." "I understand perfectly." He was looking at me like I was a stranger, like the woman he'd married had been replaced by someone he didn't recognize. "You're telling me that my wife, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world, got so drunk at a party that she forgot she was married and accidentally had sex with her ex-boyfriend. Do you hear how that sounds?" I was desperate now, grasping for anything that might make him understand. "We can work through this. We can go to counseling, therapy, whatever you want. It was one mistake. One terrible mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home," DeAndre said. "This was a choice. A series of choices. And every single one of them was a betrayal." The conversation went on for another hour. But it was pointless. Nothing I said made any difference. DeAndre had already made up his mind. Had already written off 6 years together because of one night that I barely remembered. He wouldn't listen to reason. Wouldn't consider forgiveness. Wouldn't even entertain the possibility that good people sometimes do stupid things when they're drunk and unhappy. Within a week, he'd moved into the guest room. Within 2 weeks, he'd consulted a lawyer. By the end of the month, I was being served with divorce papers. Like I was some kind of the criminal instead of his wife who'd made one terrible mistake. The worst part was how completely he shut me out. This man who'd been my best friend, my partner, my closest confidant, suddenly treated me like I didn't exist. He wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't look at me, wouldn't even be in the same room with me if he could help it. When I tried to explain, to apologize, to beg for another chance, he'd walk away like my words meant nothing. And then, as if things weren't bad enough already, I found out he was dating someone from his office, Jennifer, some project coordinator who probably thought he was amazing because she'd never seen him color code a grocery list or fall asleep during every movie they watched. Less than 2 months after I'd confessed my mistake, he was taking another woman to dinner and holding her hand like I'd never existed. That's what really hurt, how quickly he moved on. There I was, drowning in guilt and regret, barely able to function. And he was already building a new life like our marriage had meant nothing to him. 6 years together. And he replaced me in 8 weeks. What kind of person does that? What kind of love was it if he could just turn it off the moment things got complicated? The divorce was finalized in 2021, and I felt like I was watching my life end. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, gone because of one night I could barely remember. DeAndre got to be the victim, the wronged husband, the good guy who'd been betrayed by his terrible wife. Meanwhile, I was the villain, the cheater, the woman who'd thrown away a good marriage for a meaningless fling. The months after the divorce were the darkest of my life. I tried therapy a few times, but the counselors all wanted to focus on accountability and understanding my choices, like I hadn't already beaten myself up enough. I knew what I'd done was wrong. I knew I'd hurt DeAndre, but I also knew it had been a mistake, not some calculated betrayal, and nobody seemed interested in understanding that distinction. It wasn't until I started seeing Dr. Ramirez that I began to make any real progress. She's different from the other therapists I tried, calmer, more direct, less interested in making me feel worse about myself than I already did. We're working on understanding why I made the choices I did, how to rebuild my self-worth, and how to trust myself again. Because that's the thing nobody talks about when they're busy judging the cheating wife. I lost everything too. I lost my marriage, my home, my best friend, my future. I lost the respect of people who'd known us as a couple, the comfort of shared routines, the security of knowing someone had my back. I've been single for 3 years now, too afraid of screwing up again to even try dating, while DeAndre has moved on with Jennifer and probably never thinks about me at all. I know people think what happened was entirely my fault, that I got what I deserved, that DeAndre was right to leave me. But marriage is supposed to be about forgiveness, about working through problems together, about loving someone even when they make mistakes. I would have forgiven him if the situation had been reversed. I would have been hurt and angry, but I would have fought for us instead of just giving up at the first sign of trouble. Maybe that makes me naive. Or maybe it just makes me someone who actually understands what for better or worse means. Either way, I'm still here, still trying to put my life back together, still hoping that someday I'll find someone who loves me enough to stick around when things get messy. Because despite everything that happened, despite all the pain and guilt and regret, I still believe that one mistake shouldn't define the rest of your life. I still believe that love should be stronger than pride, that forgiveness should be possible, that good people deserve second chances. DeAndre obviously disagreed, and maybe he's happier now with someone who'll never disappoint him. But I can't help wondering if what we had was ever really love at all, or just convenience dressed up in wedding vows and shared bank accounts. Dr. Ramirez says I'm making progress. That understanding my patterns and triggers is the first step toward building healthier relationships in the future. She says the fact that I can talk about what happened without falling apart completely is a sign that I'm healing, that I'm ready to start moving forward instead of just surviving. Some days I believe her. Some days I think maybe there's a future out there where this whole nightmare is just a painful chapter in a larger story about resilience and second chances. Other days, I'm not so sure. Other days, I wonder if DeAndre was right. If what I did was unforgivable, if I really am the kind of person who destroys good things without meaning to. But I keep going to therapy, keep trying to understand myself better, keep hoping that someday I'll meet someone who sees past my mistakes to the person I really am underneath. Someone who understands that good people sometimes do terrible things when they're lost and confused and looking for something they can't even name. Someone who believes, like I do, that love should be about more than just the easy times. Because at the end of the day, that's all it was, one terrible night when I made the worst decision of my life. It wasn't malicious, wasn't planned, wasn't about not loving my husband enough. It was just a mistake. The kind of mistake that people make when they're human and flawed and trying to figure out how to be happy. I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I refuse to let it be the only thing that defines me.